Yeah, thank you so much. And welcome, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us today to talk about psychological health and safety, growing it from the ground up. My name is Ritzia, and I am clicking to move forward. There you go. And I'd like to introduce myself a little bit to you so you understand why I'm talking about this topic and what my background is. I'm a certified health and safety, psychological health and safety advisor. And my background is actually in psychology. I have my degree from the University of Amsterdam. And so I bring a little bit of a different perspective to this than, for instance, an HR department, which also works with health and safety in the workplace and is often the group that is accountable for the implementation of psychological health and safety initiatives. I have over 20 years of experience working both in Canada and internationally with organizations to implement individual employee support services. And I've worked for that. I've worked together with 500 companies that are multinationals. I've worked with NGOs.
I'm going to jump in for just a moment and let you know that your audio's fading a little bit in and out. So we're just going to make sure that your mic is set.
Okay.
Thanks everyone who jumped in. Yeah, let's just give that a try. Everything was working fine earlier, so I'm hoping it's just a momentary glitch.
Okay, how is this? Is this better?
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, so I will make a point of keeping this closer to me. So, as I was saying, I have worked both in Canada and internationally with health organizations to introduce employee support.
Okay, Rencia, I'm so sorry to have to do this, but it looks like for some reason when we went live, the audio is really cutting out for you.
Okay.
I'm wondering if it might, and I'm sorry everyone, I ask for your patience on this. I'm wondering, Rencia, if if there's nothing that can be done on your end with the computer audio, if we might need to consider dialing in.
Well, let me see how this goes. How is this? Does this work better?
That sounds good for now. Yeah, it could be an internet connection, so let's give it a try. And yeah, because we don't want to have to dial in unless we have to. So thanks, everybody.
Okay. All right. Okay, so I apologize for the difficulties with the audio. I hope that this works better for you and that you can follow me. So what I wanted to say about my background, and it is relevant in the sense that what I worked with was a lot of supporting employee organizations to implement individual psychological health and support programs for their employees. And what I found in that work, whether they were nonprofit organizations or multinationals, is that there really was not a lot of support for organizations to look at what their own impact might be on the psychological health of the individuals that are working for them. And I am a total believer and supporter of individual support programs for people. I think those are really relevant and make a big difference. However, I also feel that employers would benefit from being able to look at, are we part of the problem and how can we be part of the solution? And for that, one of the things that I've done is I started my own consultancy as the founder of Integral Workplace Health. One of the things that I do want to point out to you is that as a presenter, I don't read people's slides. You need to know this. So everything that I say will be in the slides and you'll be able to remember it based on looking at the slides. But I don't read slides to people or read bullet points. So I will be having an ongoing narrative with you. So let's start talking about the topic for today. And you may wonder, what does this woman have to do with it? This is Sleeping Beauty, if you didn't recognize her already. Remember her? The princess who was cursed to sleep for 100 years in an overgrown castle, waiting for the prince to come and give her the kiss, waiting for the hero to wake her up so that she could resume her life and start to make a difference. This is how a lot of top-down change initiatives can be described. You're waiting for the leadership, for the hero in the leadership to come and start things up, to give the mandate, to put aside the resources, and to start making the difference. This presentation was initially put together for people in HR, but what you'll find is that what we talk about applies to people in different places in the organization. You don't have to be in that place to start making a difference, and to be observing where you can intervene and make change. So we are going to move away from the hero perspective, and we're going to take a different way of trying to make change. What we're looking at is making change from the bottom up, where we're not waiting for the hero to come in and give the mandate and put aside the resources and tell us that we're okay to move forward. And so we're talking about the power of individuals. We're talking about the power of how small changes can reverberate throughout an organization. Organizations are systems of interconnected parts, and this is why I purposely put that my background is in social psychology and not just psychology, because I think very strongly in terms of systems and interconnectedness. And so when you move some things, or if you replace people, you change processes, that's never an isolated event. That has consequences in other places, and this is how you leverage small in your organization. We're talking about vision and focus. Psychological health and safety is not a yes, no kind of process. It's dynamic. It changes over time. It changes depending on who you have in your organization, and it changes depending on the organization that you're in. And what it's really about is putting on the goggles, learning how to look from that perspective, and maintaining that vision and perspective as you're going through and participating in the organization. And we're going to talk a bit on a practical level on, what do you know and what can you leverage that you already have to be able to start making a change. So for today, what I want to do is I want to start by giving you a little conceptual refresher about what is the background when we're talking about psychological health and safety. What exactly are we talking about? There's another great webinar that was delivered on that topic, but not everybody may have participated in that. So I'm just going to do a quick refresher on that. Then we're going to talk about how to translate that to day-to-day practices. What does that look like every single day in terms of small things that people are doing? And we're going to talk about how can you start making changes if you identify strengths and vulnerabilities that you want to leverage. And then hopefully at the end, we will have some time for a Q&A as well. Okay, I'm having some difficulty moving my slides with the mouse pad. I apologize for that. Okay, so psychological health and safety, let's talk about what that is. So this is the definition of health from the World Health Organization, and I think it's really important that we look at this because it has some fabulous elements that we may not have realized when we think and talk about health. First thing is that it recognizes health as something that is much broader than one element. It recognizes health as more than the absence of illness. And it also brings into not just our body, but it brings in our mental health, and it brings in our ability to have joy, to be productive, to participate, and to have positive relationships and be part of our community. I think that's really important to understand, and that is also the definition that we're going to be using going forward throughout this presentation. Because when you think about it, there's a lot of talk and a lot of development and a lot of awareness around mental health, which is a fabulous development. And there's a lot more compassion and understanding and destigmatizing of people who have been diagnosed with mental illness. At the same time, psychological health is more than not having a mental illness. So what that means is, for instance, that somebody who's been diagnosed, but who feels that they're able to manage on a day-to-day basis, have positive relationships, be productive, and participate, they may actually have good psychological health. On the other hand, somebody who is not being diagnosed with a mental illness that is struggling with transition, with loss, who is perhaps at the receiving end of bullying or pettiness in the workplace or at home, that person may not be able to cope on a daily basis, may find that that's becoming difficult. They may start to lose some of their joy or their ability to participate, and it may start to affect their relationships. Because somebody who's not diagnosed may still be struggling with poor psychological health. And that's a really important distinction to take forward when we're talking about psychological health and safety. In 2013, the Mental Health Commission of Canada and the Canadian Standards Association introduced the Canadian National Standard for Psychological Health and Safety. Now, a lot of people know about that, but it is still something that people are learning about and learning to understand. And as a Canadian, I am very proud to say that this standard, while it's voluntary in Canada, it is something that the International Labour Organization is taking as the template for the international standard that they are developing. And it is being watched very closely international because it really is a fabulous, innovative, and very concrete way of working with psychological health and safety in the workplace and in organizations. What it offers is essentially two components. It offers a fabulous set of guidelines and tools that you can use to implement from the top down a structure and infrastructure within the organization that is focused on fostering and spreading and maintaining psychological health and safety. The other thing that it offers, and this is another really innovative piece, a unique piece of this standard, is it offers 13 features of a psychologically healthy and safe organization. And that's what we're going to get back to as we're going through this presentation. It represents a real shift in thinking. It includes a broader definition of psychological health that we looked at earlier. The other thing that is really fabulous about this is that it looks at psychological health and safety in the workplace and in organizations in the same way that it looks at protecting physical health. So the idea of accountability, the idea of identifying risk factors, and then taking actions to mitigate or eliminate those risk factors in the same way that you would eliminate or mitigate risk factors for people working with heavy equipment or working, for instance, with chemicals in the workplace. That's something that sets that standard truly aside. And you will find when I provide, when you get the slides, there's actually an appendix that includes some resources and links to this kind of information. Now, the shift that's happening in this field towards psychological health and safety and it becoming much more of an accepted concept and an awareness has a lot of different drivers. And I acknowledge that those drivers are going to be different for not-for-profit organizations compared, for instance, corporations. However, whatever kind of organization you are, whether you are a for-profit shareholder organization or you are an organization that has a not-for-profit mandate and ideal that you are pursuing, you need to have people that want to work with you, that want to stay with you, that you can rely on, that are engaged, and that know what they need to be doing. And so there is still for you a consequence when you do not pursue psychological health and safety. And so there's different reasons why this is becoming adopted more and more as a concept. And if you are a larger organization, a larger, even as a nonprofit, you're still subject to, harassment and bullying legislation. And on that, the topic of legislation, what we're finding more and more is that legislation is not just about bullying and about harassment, which are the very overt and obvious kinds of transgressions that people may experience, but there's increasingly a focus on people are entitled to a healthy workplace. They are entitled to being treated with respect, and they can expect that in the workplace. So that also is becoming increasingly acknowledged when there's legislation around chronic stress, legislation and acknowledgement of things like burnout happening, which is that, can be death by 1,000 cuts, and where organizations are still accountable or their reputation could truly suffer. And of course, there's also social drivers for changing this, and that includes, the destigmatization of mental health. People are much more open in acknowledging, when they're struggling and what the factors are that have contributed to that. So that is a little bit of setting the stage in the context about why it's important to pursue psychological health and safety, and also, what we're actually talking about. So this is a point where I'd like to ask, are there any questions? Does anybody have questions or feedback at this particular point in time before we talk about what it looks like on a day-to-day basis?
Thanks, Rencia. So I just wanted to jump in and let everyone know that I've popped a link to the standard in the chat box, so feel free to check that out. And as Rencia mentioned, I can tell you because I've seen the slide deck, she has a lot of resources in the appendix. And I just want to remind you that we are going to send not just the full video recording, but also a PDF of the slide deck out to you as well. So you're going to get all of those resources. So no need to take frantic notes on that. And for those of you, I know I've heard from a few of you that the audio is still really bad on your end. It's quite a bit better for us now. So you may want to sign off and wait for the recording if that's the case and you're still experiencing that. Okay. All right. And Rencia, that's a good reminder as well to let everyone know that we are taking questions. So just pop them in the chat box as you think of them, and we'll do our best to get to them through the presentation or at the Q&A at the end. Okay, I think we can continue.
Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit about what does psychological health and safety look like on a day-to-day basis. Now, these are the 13 characteristics that feature in a psychologically healthy and safe workplace. And I tried to split them up rather than giving you like 13 different bullet points. I tried to kind of group them. And what you'll see is that basically what they cover is how people feel about themselves in the workplace, how they're made to feel about themselves. It covers relationship with others in the workplace. Do they feel that they're being treated with civility and respect? Do they feel that they get the support that they need, that they are recognized as whole human beings? It has to do with the task, their relationship with task that you give to them. Are they clear about what it is they have to do, what is expected for them, so that they know whether they have achieved what is expected, so that they can get a sense of achievement and mastery? Do they know what their purpose is within the organization, how what they are doing fits with the overall mandate? And I think, this is the great thing about these characteristics, is that they can be filled in differently. So they're going to be different for different industries. They're going to be different for different kinds of nonprofits. If you're an organization that works in the arts, or if you're an organization that sends people out and is working with people in crisis and in distress, for instance, your psychological job demands and your workload might be different. And the sense of meaning and engagement might be different. Very often, particularly with not-for-profits, people engage either whether they're employed or as volunteers. They are attracted to your mandate. They want to participate. They want to make a difference. It's different. When you're in a commercial organization, people aren't there necessarily because they want the stock to go up. They're there to get their career and to do their thing with the company. With the kind of organizations that are non-charitable, that are charitable, or that are not-for-profit, people participate in those because they feel a really strong ideological connection. And one of the things that comes on you is to make sure that you can engage those people, because they might have a very beautiful idea of what they have to do. At the same time, they might get something very mundane to do, and it might not be clear to them how that mundane task has anything to do with the ideals and the beautiful goals that you are pursuing, and with their ideals and connections with that. So these are the different things that we're looking at And when you want to translate these into day-to-day practice, because many of these are subjective experience. What is support? How do I show civility and respect? Organizational culture. How do I know what the culture is? You know, are people making decisions based on outcome, or are they making decisions on around taking care of people, making sure that people are included in their decision making and the impact on the people that are part of that organization? And again, within a not-for-profit organization, there may be a tremendous sense of urgency around the kind of support that you need to provide and the goals that you're trying to achieve. But sometimes outcome may become a bigger piece than taking care of your people. And that happens. There's no judgment in that. The thing is, once you become aware of that, you can make conscious decisions to make changes and to start leveraging people in a better way in the long term for your goals and expectations. So let's talk about what does that day-to-day look like when we're talking about support, respect, about clarity in the workplace. What we're talking about is we're talking about skills that people have, we're talking about knowledge that people need, and we're talking about the attitude that people have. We're talking about attitude. These are the things that you want to be looking at, that you want to be growing and fostering within your organization, and that you're looking at when you're recruiting new people. So what I'd actually like to do is, as a quick brainstorm and an exercise, I'd like to ask people in the chat to just put in some of their ideas. I'm going to go to the next slide, which has those same elements of psychological health and safety. And I'd like you to just kind of brainstorm a couple of the things that come to mind that you think would be relevant skills, relevant knowledge that people need, or relevant attitudes. What would you be looking for, and what would you need to be developing or fostering within your organization to foster that psychological health and safety? So I'm just going to give you a little bit of time to go through that and to put some ideas in the box. And then, Marina, if you don't mind sharing those with me, because you're monitoring, thank you so much for that, by the way.
Absolutely. And I can see we've got lots of great comments coming in so far. So I'm just going to read out a few of them. We have the desire to embrace change, transparency, under skills, nonviolent communication. I think we could all say that's very important. Empathy and self-awareness. Lots of those, both of those coming in.
Okay, and those are all totally on track. I love the nonviolent communication, definitely the ability to embrace change and to move with that flexibly. That can make a big difference in how people manage things. Anything else, Marina?
Yes, I'm seeing quite a few folks saying trust, which is also very important.
Absolutely. The ability to build trust. Transparency was one of the things that I heard. Yeah. But those are absolutely parts of it. I'm just going to flip to the slide. Unless there's more coming in, I'm just going to let people think about it themselves if they want to put some more in.
Sure, and there's one more, Lucia, that I'd like to mention that I think is really important and is coming up from several people as well, and that's inclusivity.
Absolutely. Inclusivity is one that, and it's a skill because it requires an awareness, it requires knowledge, and it requires an attitude. So absolutely, that's definitely one that we want to include. Here are some of the ones that I came up with from my own experience with working with different organizations. And some of them seem really kind of mundane and really common sense. You know, active listening, effective communication. You know, when somebody says nonviolent communication, being able to communicate in a way that is not confrontational, that's not intimidating, that involves a vice versa. So that ability. When we're talking about inclusivity, one of the skills around that is the ability to engage ESL staff, for instance, to understand and how to communicate with people who are English second language speakers. One of the things that we do easily is we may interrupt people because we think we know where they're going. We stop listening. We get impatient. And there's all kinds of things that we can do ahead of time and in our meetings that can invite people to feel acknowledged and invite people to participate and put forward their thoughts. And that's one of them, around inclusivity, empathy, empathic listening, and communication. That's a really great one. And it's a very difficult one as well, because what we've, when we're looking at this from a corporate perspective, even if people had the attitude that they wanted to foster psychological health and safety, and they knew about empathy, a lot of people, a lot of managers, in research, when they were interviewed, said that they didn't feel adequately equipped to have an empathic conversation. They didn't really know how to do that in a way that was safe for them and safe for the other party. So definitely that's one of them. One of the ones that I'd like to highlight here is holding people accountable. And that also, goes into effective communication, but it's very specific, because when people transgress, you also need to know how to give people feedback and how to hold people accountable on transgressing, when people are not effectively listening, when people are damaging or disrespectful to other people. So that's also a skill that goes with psychological health and safety. The ability to proactively identify people that may be struggling, and to be able to reach out again with your active listening, maybe with knowledge about mental health concerns, knowing what is available within the organization in terms of support, or knowing what's available in the community in terms of support, are all important things in terms of being able to foster that psychological health and safety and put that through. And also, obviously, to make trust. By being able to listen to people, show respect, receive respect, and put out respect, are all things that contribute to trust. Also, transparency. And transparency is one that I think is really important, again, because when you have organizations that are about helping people, and I've also experienced this in organizations that were commercial organizations around help, is that I think there's a high risk of a disconnect between the organizational objectives and what the organization wants and mandate, and what perhaps frontline staff are experiencing. They may not understand why certain things can't be done. They may not understand that you need to do certain things in order to get a grant, that you may need to do certain things in order to maintain your charitable status, or that, there are different decisions at an organizational level that are not necessarily about your mandate, but about being able to reach that mandate and what the administrative procedural things are that you need to do that. And so certainly transparency and helping people understand why certain things are important, how they fit into the organization, how you're trying to achieve things, can be a really important piece of building that psychological health and safety, of keeping people engaged with the organization, feeling that they are contributing and feeling that they can influence the organization. There's a lot of different things here that contribute, and not all of them will be there for everybody. And some organizations may have, be strong on some things and maybe have other things. Some organizations may be really good at having a workplace where there's a lot of respectful communication, but where they might not be very good at spreading information or sharing the objectives and processes and protocols. So every organization has its strengths and weaknesses, and that's what you're going to be looking for going forward. So when you're looking forward and you're going to start small, let's start by owning your goal. Anything that you want to do to make change, regardless of where you are in the organization, whether you are leadership, whether you are a coordinator of a team, whether you are a volunteer. If you want to start making changes, you need to think about what is your goal. You really need to define that, because that's the first thing to know. One, in terms of maintaining your motivation. Two, in terms of deciding what your strategy and your entry point might be. What are the tools that you need to use? What are the entry points that you want to use? And the other thing, of course, is to be able to see if you're making a difference. Is it working the way that you're trying to make a difference, or do you need to try a different strategy? And there's all kinds of different legitimate goals about why you might want to make a change. If you've observed something around psychological health and safety, maybe you just want to start changing behavior within the team that you're working with. Maybe one of the things that you want to do is create a common purpose. That can be common purpose around bringing people on board around concept of psychological health and safety and introducing respect, or some of the other things that we talked about, support, if that's one of the things that you want to foster. It can also be in terms of helping people get recognition. You know, one of the things of psychological health and safety is understanding the purpose and having meaning in the work that they're doing. So perhaps one of the things that you want to do is shore up the understanding of the common purpose that people have within the organization. That might be your entry point. Maybe what you're wanting to do is build a case. So maybe you found a hot spot, something that you want to change within the organization, or a department that you want to change. And your goal is, in this case, rather than wait for the hero, you want to be the one to awaken the hero by building the business case, by making changes that can demonstrate, or using tools that you have to demonstrate how you can, how the organization would benefit from improving some of the psychological health and safety elements in the organization. Now, here are some of the things that go into small actions that can reverberate throughout the organization. Clearly modeling, if you want to have a certain kind of behavior, the way that you yourself conduct yourself, the way that you share information, the way that you treat people, the way that you respond to emails, convey information, or the attitude that you display in how you make your decisions is an incredibly powerful way of building trust. It's an incredible way of starting change, because people respond in like. If you are somebody who treats people with respect, you will get respect back. Very few people will go out of their way to actually be disrespectful or to fight you if you go on a positive win-win attitude. One of the things you can do is make things easy. When somebody has to do something that is not necessarily desirable, take away the stress by making it as easy as possible. Whether that is about helping somebody change their behavior towards being more respectful, or towards being more clear in the workplace or in the organization around supporting the volunteers, or whether it's around doing a task that is maybe not so attractive, don't make it a stressor. Make it as easy as possible. Leverage people's tendency towards laziness. Making it near is another one. People have a hard time, focusing on far away, long distance goals. So whether it's psychological health and safety, or whether it is the mandate of your organization, people might struggle to stay focused and committed to that far away thing. Whereas if you can get people to do a small thing in that direction and show them the impact of that small thing, that makes a difference. So psychological health and safety is a big thing. But if you can start a campaign around active listening, or responsiveness to emails, or letting people know, communicating about shifts, or whatever it is that's going on, those are things that can show immediate results because they are making a difference. And you demonstrate that. Or around, this unpleasant task that somebody's doing, or this mundane task, and showing how that links to the larger perspective. So make the goals close by. and the outcomes close by. Feedback and language, how you communicate to people, is important. And a lot of that is about talking to people rather than talking about how they are or who they are. Talk about choices. That gives people options, and it takes away the idea of defensiveness. So rather than telling somebody that they're a good person, tell them, wow, you made a choice to support this particular charity. You made a choice to do this activity. Or on the flip side, when you need to give somebody negative feedback because they were particularly rude or they failed and did not manage to fulfill a commitment that they made, whether it's a volunteer commitment or not, they've made a commitment, and you need to talk to them about that. Rather than saying you're rude, you're not unreliable, maybe you want to say, look, you made a choice not to let me know. In the future, I'd like you to communicate, or I'd like to ask for you to do this differently. And that gives people a choice to change their behavior as opposed to defending themselves about what you're telling them as a static kind of thing. And in leveraging community, I'm not sure how much of you can do this. This is kind of the idea of Weight Watchers, right? So you have people that work together towards a common goal and that hold each other accountable. And you may be possible to create that within your organization, to start creating changes when you set out goals, leveraging and making a community around the purpose or around a task or a particular interest within your organization helps create community, helps create a sense of belonging within that organization, as well as helping people perhaps move forward towards goals. So is there any feedback or questions about that?
Yeah, that's great, Rencia. We do have a question that's coming from that supervision side of things. So do you have some tips about what supervisors can do to make it easier for staff or volunteers to talk about mental health and or mental illness, knowing that in some workplaces this is still a bit of a difficult subject to raise?
Well, Marina, I hate to say it's not in some workplaces, and a bit of it continues to be a big challenge in many workplaces. And definitely, thank you so much for that question, because that is one of the important things around support and respect and acknowledgement to bring that forward. We're going to be talking a little bit about some techniques, but just to answer very specifically to that question, some of the things that can help around that is testimonials. One very powerful thing is being honest and transparent about perhaps your own struggles that you may have had. And it doesn't have to be deep and dark secrets, but talking about your own stress, talking about what you may have done to deal with it. So testimonials are very important. Engaging in empathic discussions where you ask people actively, putting out the message continually in communications that mental health is something that you're aware of, that it is something that you take into account in decision making. And when we're talking through this, one of the things that they'll talk about is that there's questions you can ask as things progress throughout the organization, questions around how you organize things and how you present things. There are reminders and communications that you can do that make it clear that, hey, I know about this. Having knowledge of mental health issues can be really important. And talking about it in a way that does not, just in your language, can be a big difference as well. Does that give some ideas for the person?
Yes, I think that's a wonderful answer, and we will wait for some additional stuff, as I know you're going to cover as we move forward. Thank you.
Right. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more abstract. Let's talk a little bit about how you can use data. Now, even small organizations will have data. They may not have, combined that data. They may not be consciously tracking it, but everybody has information about their organization that they can look at that will give them some indicators and that they can use around setting goals. So one of the ways that you can use information about your organization, the kind of data that you can collect, is around for benchmarking. And so if you're a small organization, you can take data about your organization, for instance, around how hard it is to get volunteers, or how long your volunteers stay with the organization, what kind of turnaround you have, what kind of commitment. Do you often have volunteers who don't show up? These are things that you can track, that you can look at what's going on in other organizations that are doing something similar. Are they having a better track record or a lesser track record? That's one thing. The other thing, if you have a large organization, what you can do is you can look within your organization for hotspots and identify perhaps a particular challenge. You might be able to identify a particular location or a particular department that has different stats, where there is more participation, less disability, or where you have a lot of turnover, less participation, a lot of absenteeism, maybe higher disability rates or disability rates for mental illness. So those are different ways of benchmarking internally and externally. It can help you identify the spots that you might need to focus on, hot spots that need help, as well as opportunities to start leveraging and to see what's going well in a particular department that maybe you can use to spread further. You can use it for goal setting. You want to look at what are the stats that I want to change. You can use it to identify motivators. Sometimes you can find the business case on, what's going on, what are the costs, the direct and indirect costs. What does this mean for our organization and our ability to pursue our objectives? And so maybe that's what you need to start saying, okay, well, you know what? The impact is significant. Let's start an initiative to make change. And you can use it for boosting and nudging. And we're going to talk a little bit about that shortly. And that also comes into some of the answer to the question from the previous person. Now, all of these data, this is really data that originally came from the idea of what data do organizations, corporate organizations and large organizations have. If you're an organization, you're a large organization that has benefits and lots of employees, you may have disability statistics, you may have EAP statistics, and often we get those kind of aggregate lump sum. And it's very helpful to break those down, by department, to break those down perhaps by divisions or by even by time, by gender. So those can be very helpful to understand what's going on in your organization and which groups might be struggling. And so I'll give you an example. I had a colleague of mine who was working with an organization where there was one department where everything was very negative. They had, people were going off. There was a lot of absenteeism. The morale was really low. And when they went to investigate, they found out that what was happening was that these people didn't trust each other. They were having each other's odds because all of them at home, just by coincidence, were going through tremendous changes and challenges at the home front. And so they didn't have a lot of time for work or a lot of mental energy for work. So they were unpleasant to each other. They needed to take time away, which made the other person, who also didn't really have time to be at work, feel like they had to carry the burden, that they were being stuck with the, with the workload. And so once that was explored, I gave the organization lots of opportunities to intervene, to start offering resources, to get these people to work together again. And that situation was resolved. And again, they could see that back in their stats. But that's just one example. Things that, if you're a small organization, it's still relevant to track absenteeism. When people call in that they can't make whatever commitment they've made, how long does it take you to attract volunteers or to vet volunteers? How long do you hold on to your volunteers? And every organization knows stuff, even if it's through informal gossip and reputation, things that you're hearing about people in the organization. And that can be backed up often when you start looking at some of the stats. If somebody has a really nasty reputation within your organization, maybe they're not on a win-win attitude. That can show up in stats. If somebody has that bad reputation, you can see that in perhaps they're having a harder time holding on to volunteers. Perhaps they have more people that don't show up when they're supposed to, that prioritize differently than rather following through on their commitment that they made to your organization. So those are some of the things that you can do with this. One of the things that I want to point out is regarding my work, which is a great resource and an online thing. It's in the resources that you can use. So let's talk a little bit about some smaller changes that you can use. Boosting and nudging are voluntary ways of moving people towards change. And that can be change in your organization, that can be change in how you work with psychological health and safety, and implementing some of those things that we talked about in, day-to-day practice of psychological health and safety. Boosting is what I'm doing with you today. That's based on the idea that if I give you good information, I give you some tips and tools and guide, that you can make an empowered decision and that you're going to go back to your organization with hopefully at least one thing that you've decided, hey, I can do this, I'm going to try and apply this based on the information I gave you. Nudging is a little bit different from that. Nudging is still voluntary, so it's not making people do things by banning or by giving them punishment when they don't do it or giving them rewards when they do things. Nudging is something that you do by making things easier, making it so that people can follow a path and they're not being held back, for instance, by making things complicated. If you want people to join your organization, making it easy to join without having lots of forms or a complicated website, maybe that's a simplification that attracts people and makes it easier for you to get people. Maybe there are protocols within the organization. Getting people up to speed and onboarding is a way that you can simplify. Sharing social norms, I'm just going to give you the example. I'm not going right back the way you're looking at hotspots and using your data for benchmarking. The most famous example is when the UK started to share with people that were defaulting on their taxes how many people in their neighborhood had already paid their taxes. And when people saw that and started to benchmark themselves, they actually got an increase in people paying taxes. So that's by sharing social norms. And you can do that by sharing with people, for instance, how much absenteeism they have or how much turnover they have compared to other people in the organization. And that's without judgment, just saying, look, this is what's happening. And then that opens up for an opportunity for people to decide to make changes or to involve you in helping them make changes that can increase that their stats. Disclosure, we talked about that, the power of testimonials, talking about psychological health, talking about it openly, having other people that are willing to share, talk about it. I did trainings a while ago about mental health for executives and getting them up to par on some of the things that they can do in their organization. And it was amazing that people within that group started talking about their own experience. They recognized, that they had been depressed. They recognized how they had had poor psychological health or how they had experienced burnout, and disclosing that and being in a safe place, obviously, to do that makes a tremendous difference for people to be able to disclose and to also be able to make a difference and support people. Reminders, if you want people to participate in different changes that you have around psychological health, if you want to let people know, hey, this is important to us, you may want to remind them about protocols around the code of conduct. You may want to remind them with little self-help tips when you have communications that go out, so that you're helping people to remember to focus on these things. You're reminding people that this is important, that you value this in your organization, and people can work with it. Now, influencers are going to be, how many influencers you have is going to differ by location. We already talked a little bit about modeling as a very powerful tool. So you, in terms of influencers, you yourself are the first one. how you conduct yourself, how you state your values. Research shows over and over that people that are authentic, that are empathic and respectful, these are the people that make a difference in the organization. Influencers are not necessarily from the top. I mentioned earlier that a lot of top-down initiatives don't go well, and that's because you may have resistors on the individual level throughout the organization, on the informal level. If they can bring down an initiative, people can also be leveraged on different levels to move forward initiatives, values, and philosophy of the organization. So you yourself are a phenomenal influence. You can bring people on board. Sometimes it's really helpful to connect with other people in the industry that are doing the same kind of stuff that you're doing. CharityVillage is a great resource that is all about being in nonprofit organizations, and it gives lots of advice and support that can be helpful, that is unique to your situation, where you can benchmark yourself, but also where you can get advice and support and examples of what other people have done. And if you're a larger organization, maybe you have a wellness committee, or maybe you just have a volunteer communicator who is responsible for putting together meetings of volunteers or the AGM and bringing people together and creating a sense of community. So those are all ways that you can bring things together and have influencers that make a difference in the organization. Communication happens all the time. Everything you do, when you're role modeling, when you're talking to people, there's all kinds of communication platforms that are within an organization, and you can choose to consciously leverage them. I mentioned already, if you are sending out, the shifts to people, when they're expected to participate, when they're supposed to be doing, all of this you can look at and leverage to create an awareness where you either put something about self-awareness in there, you include a reminder about active listening or something, a resource around that. You can put letters. I've worked with an organization that was a corporation, but this can work for larger organizations. They sent out an annual letter to people to talk to them about themes that were being used, that were coming up with employees, what they were doing about it, emphasizing the importance of mental health, that they as an organization were committed, and what they were doing to support it, whether it was a little training or a workshop. And again, you can bring people in on that. There's a lot of free resources and places that you can bring in to come and talk to you about mental health. And you include them 5 minutes or 10 minutes in your in a meeting. You can start your meetings by communicating about, hey, how are you? How was your day? Thank you for coming. All these little things make a difference in not just what you communicate, but how you communicate. Now, there's additional resources that are available. Again, depending on your organization, some of them may or may not be around what you can use or what's relevant for you. But there are all kinds of resources available. One of the things that you can do is you can piggyback. I love when people do this. They piggyback on existing campaigns. But if you want to talk about stress and physical health, you could piggyback on, for instance, the Mental Health Awareness Week and send out something to your volunteers about mental health awareness and how it relates to your organization, particularly if you are an organization that has a mandate that involves working with people in crisis, where the job demands may be very stressful for people in terms of supporting the kinds of people that they could be affected themselves. So you can align yourself with things like around mental health awareness. You can align yourself even with, Diabetes Month and talk about physical care, how your organization supports people to take care of themselves, and what people can do, and also to acknowledge that, when people are not well, that often this affects their mental health as well, because they can't participate in the same way that they would otherwise. So these are all different things that you can use to move forward. If you have benefit providers and EAPs, definitely they have trainings, they have information that you can take and own for yourself to put forward for people. So this is, in a nutshell, different things that people can do. We're almost at the end of our hour, so I'm going to come to a conclusion, and I am going to open it up for questions and answers. So in conclusion, there you go now. My recommendation is start with yourself, set your goals, identify your own behaviors along those lines of those 13 characteristics. Put that lens on. When you're looking at different things, ask the questions. Is this going to create stress? Does this create stress? Is there a way to take that away or to deal with that? Are we going to create divisions or pit people against each other? It's going to create conflict between different people in the organization. What can we do to mitigate or eliminate those stressors that come from that? So those are the kind of questions that you can ask when there's something is changing, when there are decisions that need to be made, whether they're small or big. You by bringing that lens in and looking at what will the impact be on people, and is there something we can do to eliminate a negative impact by asking those questions and bringing that lens in, you are contributing to psychological health and safety. Change what you can. Clearly, you can change yourself. Maybe there are things within your mandate that you can shift around and change, and stay the course. The change doesn't happen overnight. It's not like you start your behavior one week and next week miraculously things have changed. Let it grow, seed it. And says, when I say from the ground up, it is really something that grows. And stay the course and watch your stats. If you have them, allow that to develop. So with that, let's go to the Q&A if there are any questions, and I'm happy to answer any questions or feedback that has come up. Marina, what do we have?
Great, thank you, Rencia. And I just want to tell everyone who needs to jump off because we are running on the hour. Thank you for joining us, and we are going to record the Q&A. So if you want to check that out, you can catch that in the recording, not to worry. But because we did get a little behind today with our audio issues, we will stay on for another 5 minutes at least to answer some questions. So Rencia, I'm going to pitch this one to you. If someone is not in a leadership or management position, and I know you've referenced this a little bit already, but what's one of the most important things that they could do every day to create better psychological health and safety in their workplace?
That is a great question, because individuals do make a difference. And one of the things that I referenced earlier is that leadership has power to reward or to punish people. But power also comes from the way that you conduct yourself, from your authenticity, and the way that you treat people. And so you can contribute to that as an individual at any level within the organization by your own behavior, by practicing active listening, by watching your communication, by being aware and reaching out to people that you think may be struggling. By watching, for instance, even if you're not in a leadership position, you may be part of welcoming new people to the workplace. So sharing information, giving people knowledge about how things are done. You don't have to be a leader. Acknowledge that somebody did a good thing, or that they did something nice, or something valuable that made a difference. So all of those, and it sounds so common sense, but in the end, these really are the things that make a difference. Because when they're not there, it's like a death by 1,000 cuts. You suffer if in a long time an environment that is not respectful, not grateful, not personal. It does come to haunt the people in that organization and their psychological health. So these small things actually make a big difference. And what you see is that people reciprocate.
And I love, Rencia, that you identified influencers, because I think that's a really important concept, that oftentimes we talk about leadership or management positions, but you can be a leader in your organization without necessarily holding the leadership title or the traditional leadership title.
Absolutely. And that shows, there's different ways of having power, and that shows, research shows that over and over again, that the power that people have, the respect and the influence that people have in the organization isn't necessarily tied to their title, and that we sometimes overlook that. And we run into it mostly in the negative when people are resistors and trying to stop things or objecting to things, whereas obviously you can also be on the other side and move things forward rather than blocking them. So, but that's where it's most obvious that people can have a tremendous influence, even if they're not in leadership.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the negative side, yeah.
Yeah, and then as we do think about leadership, we've had quite a few questions come in related to how teams and staff and volunteers can support one another when it might be someone in the leadership position that is maybe fostering not such a psychologically healthy and safe workplace.
Yeah, that's always a stickler, because nobody really wants to be the one to go out and tell the manager that they're awful. And so, yes, so you can create community, but you can try and do it in a positive way. And again, if you work together, what happens when somebody is not a good leader or a nasty leader? There's a couple things. One, you don't necessarily want to assume that that person is of bad intent. A lot of the time, those kind of things are actually about people not knowing how to be leaders. A lot of managers get promoted beyond their competence. They may be really good at one thing, but they're not good at managing people. They may be just really terrified of getting into personal things or not being liked or not being able to get the job done. So in any time that you're dealing with a leader that is not good or pleasant to work with, don't assume, that this person is of malicious intent. That makes a difference in how you interact with that person. The other thing is that you can, within that, rather than going to complaining about that person and we're all on this and we're hard done, that's what often happens. People confer on the negative. Make a concerted effort to say, look, this is not how we want to be treated. This is not how we're going to treat each other. And you can actually do that forward in your communication with the manager. You don't have to come out and say, you're a horrible manager, but you can do things like asking questions like, help me understand, or I don't quite understand how this decision was made. Can you help me understand? Or what would you like me to do? Or how would you like me to approach these? Sometimes by doing that, you give the person, without putting them on the defensive, the opportunity to roil back. And sometimes if you know something about that person, ask them. If you're not on the assumption that they're of malicious intent, and very few people actually are, my experience with nasty managers, they're out there, absolutely. Most of them are people that just are kind of out of their depth. And you as a team can help them and reach out to them by being good communicators with each other and with that person, sticking to some of those basic communication skills in how you give feedback, how you ask questions, how you listen to people, to bring them on board and to let them know that it's safe to communicate with you.
That's wonderful, Rensia, and I think that's a great place to wrap things up for today. So I wanted to just thank you first and foremost for coming and presenting today, but also I know that you've added at the end of this slide deck, you've added a lot of links in an appendix for everyone, and we are going to send that out as well. And folks, there's going to be a lot of additional resources that you can access there for even more information. And I love what you're talking about, Rencia, in terms of, identifying your own behavior and changing your own behavior. We also have a lot of fantastic recordings of past webinars that cover a lot of those kind of soft skills, things like active listening, conflict management, all of that really important stuff. And what we've heard from some participants as well, and this might be something that some people might want to think about, is they've actually watched those recordings together as a team and then taken that as an opportunity to discuss. So that could be a great exercise for your teams as well. So Rencia, did you have any final comments before we wrap up today?
I think we're good. I want to thank everybody for being here. I'd like to thank people for putting in questions and for putting comments in. I apologize for the audio, and I hope that people have identified at least one thing or one strategy that they can take forward, and feel they can make a difference. Something that they can take from this to make a difference in their own workplace or an organization.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. It's been a great session. I also want to thank everyone for their patience with the audio. We really appreciate Rencia being with us today. I will just remind everyone that we are going to follow up with you by email later this afternoon, most likely, or at least by tomorrow morning, with the webinar recording and that slide deck. There will also be a short survey that takes less than 5 minutes to fill out, and we hope that you'll complete that for us. You'll have an opportunity there to let us know if there's other topics you'd like to see covered in the future, and we'll also share feedback with Rencia as well. So if there's anything you'd like her to know, do pop that in there. Our next free webinar is coming up next week on September 26th. We're going to be discussing the new Senate report on the charitable sector. And we're very pleased to be welcoming a very special guest, the Honorable Ratna Omidvar, who co-authored the report, is going to be with us. So you won't want to miss that one. There will be a link to register in the email that you receive later on. And with that, I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us today. I hope that we'll see you again next week, and bye-bye until then.
All right, and thank you, Marina, very much for moderating this and for the opportunity. Take care.